Well, welcome to BigTent, everyone. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I am board president at BigTent USA. At BigTent, we are steadfast in our commitment to defending our democratic values, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower you with facts and calls to action so you can become a stronger, more effective advocate for our country. So I'm so excited to welcome back to BigTent Andrew Weissmann. Andrew is a New York law school professor and widely respected analyst on MS Now. He was a lead prosecutor in Robert Mueller's special counsel's office, chief of the fraud section in the Department of Justice, general counsel of the FBI under Director Mueller, and leader of the Enron task force. He is now co-host of MS Now's award-winning podcast, Main Justice, which is one of my go-tos, and I highly recommend it. He has written 2 New York Times bestsellers and also writes the Substack Behind the Headlines. Galen is the independent political strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project and has a new project, Read, which I don't remember. I'm sorry, because you just sent it to me. So please just say what it is and give us a little word about it, and then I'm going to let you take the conversation from there. So Andrew and Reed, thank you so much for coming to BigTent, and we're really looking forward to the conversation. Reed, quick update on what you're up to.
Sure. Thank you, Kitty. And thank you, Andrew, for joining us. And hello, everybody. Yes, I have just launched an organization called Civic Forum, civicforum.org. And the idea here, guys, is to bring new and different voices to places that don't get to hear new and different voices that often. So we're going to go to places that are outside the top 25 media markets in the US. And our first event is coming up June 17th in Richmond. I will be interviewing a young woman named Crystal Bayat. She's from Afghanistan. She stood up to the Taliban, had an AK-47 or AK-47s put in her face. She was brought here during the Biden administration and has spent the last 5 years raising money to get young Afghan women out of the country and into the U.S. So an incredible story. You can go find out more at civicforum.org. I hope you'll sign up. But because we have Andrew on board with us today, first and foremost, Andrew, I always say that first you're in Paris, boo. Second, you got to go to Roland Garros, boo. And you have a resume so long that most other people would need 3 or 4 lifetimes to get through it. So welcome today.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Kitty.
Yeah, thanks. And yes, as always, thanks to Kitty and thanks to BigTent. Okay, so Andrew, the first thing I wanted to ask you before we get to the book is, you are a rare breed in Washington politics, which you have spent multiple years under multiple different administrations of different parties. And so going back to, the early 90s, give us a sense of what it's been like in the last, I don't want to say how many years, since, obviously this is all pre-Trump, but give us a sense of what it was like to work in different party administrations. Was it one of those things where justice was so sacrosanct, where the FBI was so sacrosanct that you could work for a George Bush, you could work for a Barack Obama? And yes, there were stylistic differences, there were leadership differences, but give us a sense of what it was like.
Sure. So I worked for the Department of Justice for 21 years. And that obviously means that I worked under many different administrations. I was hired under a Republican administration. And I actually left in 2019 under a Republican administration and worked for, I think every president at some, since then, during that interim. And that's such a good question because it tells you how different Donald Trump has been. There were signs of it in the first administration, in Trump 1.0, but it's sort of on steroids now. Politics people are not going to really get this, but politics has had just nothing to do with what a career prosecutor does. I was never in any job. I was never a political appointee. I've always, when I was in the department, it was an apolitical slot, meaning a career slot. I wasn't appointed by the president to take any of those positions or anyone at the president's behest. One of the ways of thinking about that is I never knew the politics of anybody I was working with. I started out, as we briefly mentioned, before we started, I started out as an organized crime prosecutor. I didn't ask about the agents I worked with, the prosecutors I worked with, or the mobsters who I was prosecuting. What party are they in? It's just irrelevant to the work. And a good sign of that is I worked, as you mentioned, on the Enron case. That was during uh, the Bush administration, and there was a wonderful acting attorney general who oversaw our case, who was Larry Thompson. And at no point, zero, did you have any sense that, oh, the White House is going to intercede or take a position or in any way influence what we were doing? It was just out of the question. It was a third rail that there would just not be political involvement. And now fast forward to where we are now, and you could just go on and on and on about that. Obviously everyone who is listening to this is obviously quite aware of the slush fund, quite aware that Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general, is the only signatory on the so-called or the alleged civil, settlement release that purports to absolve the president and his family and companies of any civil liability. The sort of the openness with which the current administration is directing what the department does, and what Todd Blanche says is, of course, that's okay. Confusing what is legally permissible with what is absolutely horrendous as a policy matter and what it means to our country. And just such a new thing that no prior president had ever thought was appropriate.
Um, let's talk about this, the settlement that you talked about. I mean, that's one, I assume that's unprecedented, as you noted. And second, does that survive in administration? I mean, is it like, I mean, I don't assume it was written, in a stone tablet, right? Like Moses
Yeah.
isn't carrying these things down. It didn't get added as the 29th Amendment to the Constitution. So how does that
Yeah.
even work?
So, so there's the alleged settlement that I think is, circling the drain. That's the 1.776 billion. It's
Mhm.
really not. People should not think of it as a settlement. The lawsuit was there as a fig leaf, in my view,
Mhm.
just so that Donald Trump could say, "Give me the money," and then I'm going to figure out how I want to spend it. But to me, it is much closer to think of it as theft of government funds,
Right.
with the fig leaf of the lawsuit. And so that's sort of thing one. The release, the civil release, I do not think that survives. Even now, that could be something that the judge, who has asked a series of very good questions, that she wants to know essentially why this whole thing isn't a fraud on the court. She could wrap into that not just the fund, but also the civil release. But I don't think the civil release is worth the paper it's printed on. Now, there will be litigation about it if we get to a normal presidency, where Donald Trump, if there's an investigation into, for instance, his taxes or something like that, he'll say, "No, I have this civil release." But the other side, the government, at that point will say, "Let's go to litigation, and I want to see whether there was true negotiation over this." And that would be, if it wasn't so hideous, that's really fun litigation, because of course there's no litigation at all. I should say, one of the things that I thought was fascinating in the Axios story that broke, yeah, it seems like a year ago, but it was yesterday, reporting that this whole sort of scheme is, they're sort of pulling the plug on it, or as I like to joke, they're flushing the slush fund.
Right.
Say that three times fast. But if they're flushing the slush fund, one of the things that the Axios story said at the end was somebody from the White House is quoted as saying, "We knew nothing about this. They
Right.
hoodwinked us. We were blindsided." That's preposterous. The White House is the plaintiff. I mean, this
Right.
is the president is the plaintiff. What do you mean DOJ settled a case that the plaintiff didn't know about? I mean, it is the blame game is going to be sort of fun to watch as a matter of sort of the blood sport of it all, if it weren't so lunatic in terms of what's happening. I will somewhat translate this to not directly what my book is about, but one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about is systemic reform. How do we harden our structures and our target so that we do not deal with these kinds of issues going forward, or we help ourselves going forward? And one of the things that Congress can do is say, you know what, the President of the United States, while he is president, cannot sue the government civilly. You know what, if you have a lawsuit, you can bring it after you are no longer the president, but you cannot be on both sides of an issue. And that is just an obvious statute. Now, there are people talking about that, and I think it's great. But we really have to be figuring out how do we make our systems stronger and healthier. And it's something, I used to be in the intelligence community at the FBI, and you think about how do you harden the target? How do you make it harder for authoritarians to repeat what we are going through?
So you brought up three things there that I'm going to go out of order here, but the first is this idea, and this is part of your book too, is this idea of deceit, right? This idea that, well, the White House didn't know anything about it. They hornswoggled us, all this other stuff. So, right, like they lie as they breathe. But of course, Andrew, that's not new anymore. And I feel like as a population, we've almost become inured to it, which is like every Friday Iran is going to get solved, and every Sunday it's not, right? Every Friday it's going to get
Totally.
solved, and every Sunday it's not. That's one I want you to talk about. Two is the systems piece, because when you talk about what you in the intelligence community, when you talk about hardening something, that's actually a physical security, right? How do I, make sure there's an air gap between a sensitive file and the internet? Or how do I make sure that you and I have to go into a skiff to have a conversation that no one else can hear? But systems, as designed by humans, are all sort of part of our collective imagination. They only exist because we all agree. And then third is Congress, which I feel like right now, Andrew, we only really have two operating, and I would say hyperactive branches of government, which are the executive and the judiciary. And in too many ways, they're in cahoots. But let's start with the deceit piece.
Yeah. Okay. So it is true that um, we have we have certainly had deceitful politicians and candidates for office in our past. It is not a new invention, but that does not mean, one, that it's not gotten worse in the sort of rampant nature of what's going on. The Washington Post in Trump's first term cataloged 30,000 lies just in the first term. And as Sarah Longwell joked when I was on the Bulwark, she said, that seems a little low. Um, because it comes to something like 20.9 per day. And she was thinking, that does seem low.
Well, it's
So,
just the ones we know about, right?
yeah. And so I think that the issue is not becoming inured to things and not normalizing uh, what is going on and recognizing how abnormal this is, and that if we don't do something about it, we only have ourselves to blame. It's like that old saying, which is, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. It's like if we don't have a system to deal with this, it is really on us. And that's where um, I I talk about how we in this country criminalize lies in so many different ways. We civilly regulate lies, such as defamation, in so many ways, but we don't do it with respect to political lies. So, for instance, if you are called to testify before Congress, if you lie to Congress, that is a crime. Not, by the way, not make a mistake, not give an opinion, but if you materially lie to Congress, that is a crime. Roger Stone was prosecuted and convicted by a jury of just that. But if Congress lies to us, that's nothing. There's no legal ramifications, and this is more in your world than mine, which is there's increasingly no political ramifications. And I think some of that has to do with the sort of the media environment we're in, where we have such a balkanized media system. And so that is what I address. But I first start by talking about all those different ways in which we don't say that, though, don't worry, this is protected by the First Amendment. We actually say, no, if you lie about the Enron stock, if you lie to Congress, or if you lie to banks, all of that is criminalized. If Rudy Giuliani lies about Georgia election workers, if Donald Trump lies about E. Jean Carroll, those are civilly regulated as defamation. So I sort of was dealing with a lot of these. I know an example that might be fun or dear to your heart is I give an example from my old organized crime work, where a boss in the Genovese family lied to the public about whether he was actually competent to stand trial. So all of those are sort of illustrations that I wanted to give sort of real life, clear-cut examples so that the book is not an academic book. It's written for
Sure.
non-lawyers to sort of
Thank
be able
God.
to understand. Yeah. By the way, all of that, kudos to I have the world's best editor at Little Brown, and they stood behind me even while the president was attacking me and issued an executive order about me. And were fearless, and they also were fantastic in making the book readable for people.
Well, and to your point, Andrew, and I assume in your experience too, as we all know, in Washington, it's not the thing you did that gets you in trouble. It's the cover up and the lying. So, for example, like Scooter Libby, right?
Totally.
He didn't get in trouble for outing an undercover CIA operative. He got in trouble for lying to the FBI.
Right. So, I mean, what he did in outing is terrible, but the lying about it was actually a crime. And so that's where one was just sort of morally repugnant. The other was
Right.
actually illegal. We are seeing some of that, as we talked about just in the slush fund, where, the White House saying, oh, we didn't know. I mean, that can't be true. And we're going to see this blame game where they're all going to sort of be sort of deciding who's going to hold the hot potato, because Donald Trump is never going to say it's his own fault, which obviously it is. And what I would think is Todd Blanche ultimately is going to hold that hot potato. And this is one where, once again, you think if you kowtow, and you do everything for this guy, that somehow he's going to be loyal for you. What's going to happen is you're going to be like Mike Pence and Pam Bondi, and there's no loyalty. And these people, I mean, to me, I will relate this to Enron, which is, if you ask me what was the lesson of Enron, the lesson of Enron was not Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling and, oh, aren't they bad people? And this is a terrible thing. There will be bad people and corrupt people in every walk of life, in politics and business, everywhere. We're humans. The issue is the complicity of those people around them. And that is where, as much as we're seeing judges and lawyers and others stand up and be wonderful role models, we're also seeing the worst of humanity, the people who are caving, who know better. And
Right.
that's what empowers Donald Trump.
Well, and just to extend on that point for a moment, it was, I believe, and you probably know these people or these attorneys, but it was several, I believe, it was high-ranking DOJ attorneys in the aftermath of the 2020 election who said, like, you do this, we're leaving, right? And even Trump back
Absolutely.
then said, okay, I'll back off a little bit.
What we're living through in many ways is a science experiment of, uh, if you want to know sort of what those people were doing behind the scenes in Trump 1.0, you can look at what's happening in Trump 2.0, where Donald Trump has realized he doesn't want the people who are going to say no, which, by the way, is vital. If you're a good leader, that's exactly what you want. You want the people who are going to be pressure testing what you're doing. But that in many ways is sort of an example from Trump 1.0, where there were people who showed some independence. Again, I'm painting with a broad brush. I'm not saying everybody, but and everyone stood up at the as the way they should. But there was so much more of it here. Where loyalty is everything, and competence seems to be, I won't even say secondary. I mean, is there anyone in the country who would say that Kash Patel was chosen because he is the very best person to keep the country safe, to be head of the FBI? And that should be, just to not normalize this, that should be the number one criteria for somebody in that position, having been there, for the head of the FBI, the head of DOJ, the head of the CIA, the head of the Department of Defense, the head of the DNI, which we just saw
Is a
coming out
housing
now.
developer.
Right. So, Reed, can you imagine you have access to and an obligation to read the presidential daily brief every day.
Right.
You see the threat streams every day. You have seen the consequences of missing, of not of making a mistake, of not following up.
Right.
You have seen people lose their lives, Americans lose their lives. Let's talk about America first. And with that experience, you decide to put people in a position who do not have the requisite experience.
Right. Or even, I mean, this is, I mean, we could do hours on this, Andrew. So yes,
Yeah.
that is for sure. And to your point about America first, I mean, I remember at the beginning of the Trump administration when Hegseth just barely squeaked through his nomination, I asked a very smart friend of mine in the national security space, I'm like, what do you think? And he said, I don't think that if Moscow and Beijing drew it up, they couldn't have done it better. Right. So I think
Yeah.
that's a piece of it. But I want to get to, we have a bunch of questions I want to get to in a minute, but I'm going to take
Yep.
the moderator's discretion and go for a couple of extra things. So you talk about the
Yep.
systems. So let's talk about those systems because I think back to Eisenhower, right, which is you can't legislate morality. So give us a sense of what you think those systems should be. And let me ask, and someone, let's see, one of the people, I'm sorry, I can't remember who said that, but how do we even begin? Do we have to first do a damage assessment of what's happened before we can even say, okay, and these are the things we need to do? And is that is that something that can be done in a proper administration? Is that a generational project? Like, how do you see that actually coming to fruition?
So look, I think there's some things that you can think about right now. My book is about this idea of election lies. It can happen at the state level, it can happen at the federal level, and there are various potential models. That is something you can think about now. It is a problem that is clear, and it is a problem that's not going away. That's one. I wrote a piece for the New York Times on Friday that has to do with a way to deal with retributive, sort of what I call BS indictments, a way to deal with that Congress could pass any day of the week. And it should be bipartisan because it would apply to any administration to make it harder to weaponize indictments so that you wouldn't see the Southern Poverty Law Center case. You wouldn't see the Seashells case. You wouldn't be able to even try to bring a case against 6 members of Congress for exercising their First Amendment rights. And so that's something you could do now. There are other things where there's the question of criminality, because there's a whole scope of things which are laws that I think need to be put in place because norms have not been sufficient. And one of the things that Trump has shown is that a lot of the good faith and norms that we took for granted were so integral to how you could function as a country, and that we really need to figure out how to make much harder, meaning make them laws. I am, by the way, Reed, not foolish enough to think, oh, you change the structures and that's the end of it. We're humans. Humans live in a structure. They will always look to see ways to get around things and what kind of weaknesses there are. But that's not a reason not to make it harder. And that was the 9/11 Commission report was all about that. It said, we know that we can't say this will never happen again if you institute these reforms, but we shouldn't have to overcome systems. We should make the systems work for us. So, that it's not the solution, but it is certainly helpful. I think the harder issue is that I think there will be, if we get out of this, which I am hopeful we will, there is going to be the general tendency that we have seen in the past to say we're going to look forward, we're not going to look backwards. President Obama did that. President Biden did that. Merrick Garland largely did that. That is the wrong message. If you say a president while in office is immune and can't be charged, and you say, but when they're out of office, we can't do anything, because we should look forward, the message you are sending is that they are above the law. And again, assuming that you have the proof, assuming it is a crime that is typically prosecuted, and others that we don't turn ourselves into a place where we have show trials. But I think it is critical that we start acting like other major Western countries. France has charged and indicted Sarkozy on numerous occasions. Marine Le Pen is now disqualified for a certain period of time for running for office because of her conviction for fraud. And now she's appealing it. Good for her. There's due process for her, and there should be due process. In Brazil, the president, I write about this in Liar's Kingdom, the president in so many ways, so similar to Donald Trump, is both civilly was barred from holding office for a certain number of years and was then criminally convicted for insurrection. So he both said, I won the election when he didn't, and he fomented a insurrection and was criminally convicted for it.
And I believe the president of South Korea as well, just recently, right?
South Korea, England has a law, in case people are thinking, you want something that seems closer to the sort of Anglo-Saxon world. England has a law that if you materially lie about your opponent in an election, you can be disqualified and not be allowed to run for office. And so there are just a variety of things that we need to be thinking about to, as I said, harden the target. So that, because Donald Trump has set, this is one really a question for you, but I think Donald Trump has set a model out there so that, let's say he's off the political stage tomorrow, like this, let's take this as a hypothetical. Aren't people going to emulate this and think, oh, I can recreate that special sauce? And all of that to me, this is the challenge of our lifetime. And this is the 250th anniversary of our country. And I think we owe it to the people who are going to be here for the next 250 years to figure out, like, one, how did we screw this up? And two, how are we going to try and fix it?
Well, so, just to bring it to some personal experience. So back 25 years ago, it's hard to believe that, like I was a Schedule C appointee, right? Not a civil servant like yourself, but just another political hack that got a job at HHS, right?
Yeah, that's the way I think of you, Reed. Yeah.
That's whatever, yeah. But I remember in that administration, Andrew, like the idea of a Hatch Act violation terrified us. And for those, the Hatch Act is basically says like a government employee can't do political work on government time. I think I'm dumbing it down, but that's the basic of it.
You got it.
Like that doesn't even exist anymore. And so to your point, I think this is a really good one. And I don't besmirch a political party. To your point, we've brought this back up, the humanity of it, which is whoever gets elected president next and is that Schedule C mook at HHS, because this stuff doesn't matter. I mean, look, and because here's the thing, I do bring it back to the last 11 years of Donald Trump being first and foremost on the political stage, which is He has said none of it matters. Do what you
Right.
want. And so how do we inculcate those, those staff people, those political people, those people in the DOJ or at the White House with like all of the things you saw for the last 10 years? We're not going to do those. We're not going to do any of those things, right? And you're going to be tempted by people left, right, center, above you, below you, everything else. And like, I think to me, Andrew, it's not just, it's yes, there's, and I still want to get to Congress, it's the systems piece, but there's also like I don't want to use the word re-education because that sounds so, Orwellian, but like, how do we start to tell those that want to be in public service, like, you should see the past not as something to be done, but to be avoided. And then that other piece about, presidents always want to look forward because nobody wants to be the guy or the gal sweeping up the broken glass into the dustpan, right? That nobody
I,
wants to spend their presidency doing that.
Yeah, but that is a mistake because then we live with those consequences going forward. I mean,
Right.
if you don't have negative consequences for that behavior, it's going to repeat. I mean, this is not rocket science, and that is incumbent on citizens. The answer that I'm trying to avoid giving, even though it is true, is the answer, which is we have to teach civics. And of course, that's true. I mean, I really don't mean to belittle it, but one of the things I say in the conclusion of my book is given the situation we're in now, that is like the Titanic hitting an iceberg and the captain saying, I really think we need to invest in better radar. Um, it's
Right.
true, it's just not the time and place. And so, again, I mean, I thank my lucky stars for the education I was given and the values that, my teachers and parents instilled in me. And that obviously needs to be done, but that's not a short-term solution for an immediate problem. One of the things, and again, I try to stay in my lane, which is, DOJ and lawyers. One of the things that I have also written in the New York Times about is the Department of Justice has this sort of traditional rule of we don't speak publicly, we only bring indictments and we speak through the indictments.
Right.
And there's many ways in which that is a very, very good thing. But the next normal administration needs to be speaking a lot more about what they're doing and why. Because otherwise you're left to conspiracy theories and the crazies out there, and you need to at least be trying to vocalize what you're doing. My analogy to it was Archibald Cox during Watergate, where he held a very famous press conference. You can still go to YouTube and listen to it. And because he thought it was incumbent on Americans to hear from him about why he was seeking the tapes, why he was going to the Supreme Court. And in so many ways, he was both explaining substantively his answers, but also people then could see him.
Mm.
He was his own exhibit. In other words, you can get a measure of the person and say, oh, he's not a caricature. He doesn't come off like, Ken Starr. He should use another special counsel example.
Right.
He seems like a mild Harvard professor who's doing the right thing. And so I think being much more willing to speak publicly and explain what you're doing is going to be an extremely important part of the job.
Yeah. And again, because I mean, Americans hold our institutions in so little regard. These are
Right.
people I don't know, I've never heard of. Do they really impact my lives? These are all people doing bad things for the wrong reasons. Am I even surprised? Speaking of people, bad people doing things for the wrong reasons, let's talk about Congress for a second. So, and the only reason I say that is because Congress is currently clocking it at a 10% approval rating. And which is an amazing front on on two sides. One is 90% of Americans don't believe the sky is blue. And second, who are these 10%? I assume they're staff, lobbyists, and donors. Like, who else could they be? But let's talk about Congress. They have been prostrate for not just Republican Congresses, but Congress generally over the last several decades has really tried its hardest not to make anything of substance happen in this regard, but also One of the questions was, second to this, is if the Democrats take the U.S. House, Andrew, do you believe there will be any substantive work that can get done in this context?
I do think so. I do think so because it remains to be seen what will happen also with the Senate. But you have to remember, and again, this is more your lane than mine, but Donald Trump has certainly, this is the technical legal term, pissed off a lot of people in Congress.
Right.
And so exactly how that plays out and where people will be voting with respect to him may change. He also is going to be a lame duck. Whatever he says about a third term, there is no third term in under the Constitution, and so it is going to become sort of a wild ride as we watch the cage match, which I think is sort of emblematic of what's happened, what the White House has suddenly been turned into, the back of the what we're going to do to sort of celebrate Donald Trump's birthday. That the sort of cage match of what's going to happen post Trump is going to be fascinating to watch. I do think that there's an opportunity, as the slush fund facts have shown, for Congress to to do something, and certainly for the Democrats to keep on proposing things that are rational, and see if Republicans bite on it, and if they, and good for them if some of them do. And so I do think that there will be movement there. I also think that I'd keep my eye on the Supreme Court. And I think that right now there's a very deliberate strategy to not have abortion become a topic before the midterms. And I think there's also a strategy to not have one or two of the Supreme Court justices step down prior to the midterms, even though there's a bit of a gamble there in terms of what would happen to the Senate. But again, I think this is just my speculation, is that that's all very deliberate to sort of not have certain issues become more central before the midterms. But again, by the way, this is me playing you.
Yeah, right. No, listen, I appreciate it. And let's be clear, like electoral politics, whatever anybody says, not rocket science. Good versus bad, new versus old. It's pretty simple. Don't overcomplicate it. But Andrew, if the Democrats were to take either house or both houses of Congress, is there something specifically you'd like to see them promote or introduce?
Yeah. I wrote this New York Times piece about a very, very simple way to really make it hard to have the weaponization of DOJ through these bogus indictments. And that is to put into law what is an internal DOJ rule, meaning right now it's a norm. To me, it is clear that the Department of Justice is not following it. And so that is one where everybody in Congress should want this, because unless you are in favor of retributive indictments. But if you're worried about what another administration could do, you should want this too, which is just make it harder. Make it so that when a prosecutor goes to the grand jury is instructed that you don't have to just have this very, very low standard of proof to bring a charge, that you need a much higher standard. You could also say the Congress could pass a law that says the transcript of what happened in the grand jury needs to be given at the request of the defendant to the judge to look at, because we've seen what happened in Chicago, where it's beyond belief what happened there. But one of the things that happened is the prosecutor, according to the judge, removed the grand jurors who disagreed with her, who took issue with what was going on. And she's like, bye-bye. And then when the judge said, I need to see the transcript, that part of the transcript cut out.
Right.
So crazy. So the judge goes, I see that there was something cut out. I need to see it. And of course, the judge, goes ballistic, and the case was dismissed. So there are lots of things like that could be done. And I do think that I really want people to be thinking about structural reforms, because our checks, this is your point about that we have two, not three functioning branches of government, to be thinking about other systemic reforms that need to go into place. Lots of people have talked about Supreme Court reform, about age limits, things that can be done without a constitutional amendment. And because obviously those kinds of things are very, very hard to get accomplished. But there are lots of things that can be done that will ameliorate what we're dealing with right now.
All right, so I want to take a question. Let's see, from a question here, Andrew. Would it make sense to make the Department of Justice a new constitutional branch so the executive branch wouldn't oversee it? Several states apparently have this.
Yeah, and so do other countries. And the obviously the I love the question because it is really big picture and it deals with like the Supreme Court of the United States in the Trump immunity decision was basically said the Department of Justice is the president's like toy thing. And he can sort of do whatever he wants. And when he's dealing with them, he's also completely immune from criminal liability when he's doing that, if he's in any way acting as the president. And so there are obviously some downsides if you were to have a completely separate sort of fourth branch. You do want accountability. You do want some limits on what they can do. The special counsel rules that I operated under when I reported to special counsel Robert Mueller, we were within the Department of Justice under DOJ rules. That was a reaction to the Ken Starr special counsel investigation, which many people viewed, and I did too, as sort of off the rails, that they sort of were like Torquemada. They just went on and on and on and on. And they violated what Justice Robert Jackson said, which is that you should be prosecuting crimes and not people, meaning you target crimes. You don't just say, oh, read Galen, I'm just going to continue looking at him and looking at him and looking at him and looking at him until I find something to prosecute.
Right.
And so that was sort of the knock on Ken Starr. And so that would be the concern of creating this separate Department of Justice. But you can put checks and balances on them as well. And you can put limits on what they're doing and have a check on it. But the question's such a good one because of the problem of the president saying, I can do what I want with the Department of Justice. Now, the thing that I proposed in the New York Times and have been talking about is one which is a lot more doable than the question of can you create a separate branch? Because it is extremely hard, and it should be extremely hard to have a constitutional amendment. So I'm trying to find ways to pull power from the executive branch that is within congressional reach.
So there's been a couple of questions about, and this goes to, clean up on aisle Trump, Andrew, which is post a Trump presidency. Do you believe that he or those people, there's this quote unquote settlement with DOJ about he and his family and his businesses. There's a question about Pam Bondi, could she be held accountable? And then this also ladders up to a conversation about presidential immunity, which the idea was, I can't imagine that the founders assumed that like there would be George Washington out there pardoning everybody he could and then himself on the way out the door.
Yeah. So so a number of things. So let's just take the slush fund and this idea that one, a pardon cannot apply to civil liability. And so a future administration, even with presidential pardons having been given, cannot pardon potential civil liability. If the president were to try to pardon other people for assisting him in potential criminal liability, he, under the pardon power, can do that. We saw it in the first administration. We saw him pardon Paul Manafort and Roger Stone and a whole slew of people. And he could pardon Pam Bondi, he could pardon Todd Blanche, whoever he wants to. The pardon power is extremely broad. The open issue for the pardon power is, can the president pardon himself? That has not been decided. And there, I'm a lawyer, I can argue that both ways because the pardon power is very broad in terms of how it's written, but it's not
Mhm.
conceivable, but that the founders thought you could be the judge in your own case. So that there's
Right.
really good arguments on both sides of that issue. Um, the thing that's useful to remember is um, Donald Trump bringing a civil lawsuit for $10 billion for the saying that a contractor leaked his tax returns. That is not something that he was doing as president. That is a personal issue, where he's saying, I'm personally hurt and I'm personally bringing this lawsuit, meaning there is no presidential immunity for that. That is not
Mhm.
something he's doing. I mean, he may be president at the time, but that is just a personal thing. And so the Trump versus United States decision, as horrendous as I think it is for so many reasons, would not apply to the president acting in his personal capacity. And so that's one where if the court were to say that you cannot pardon yourself and there were to be criminal liability there because it's theft, this is all sort of like many, many hypotheticals down the
Yeah.
road, then there could be liability.
Do you think, though? I mean, this was one of the things that I always thought after his first term in the wake of January 6th is that, you know, everybody sort of ran right up to the line of prosecuting him, or they thought, we'll talk about it, we'll talk about it, we'll talk about it, and nobody ever did anything.
Well, it is worth remembering there were two federal indictments against Donald Trump, the insurrection case and the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. And I have been very critical of Merrick Garland for especially slow rolling in terms of the when it was that they sort of really got down to business in investigating the insurrection case.
Mm.
Um, I'm less critical on
Most of it was
the
caught on television, by the way.
totally. I mean, don't get me started. Like, I mean, I worked at the FBI. I had to live through watching the FBI say after January 6th, hey, could you help us figure out how to do this case? And could you help us with evidence on this? And I'm like, where were you yesterday
Right.
when we were watching it? I mean, I was unbelievable how unprepared they were to take action, and that they were very prepared when it came to over the prior summer on Black Lives Matter. There they were very ready to do
Right.
contemporaneous arrests. Um, so, um, uh, so remind me where we were because I can easily digress.
I was asking about, whether or not he would actually. We talked about a
Oh,
post-presidential prosecution level iteration, but would that actually happen in your mind?
yeah. I mean, just, I think what is going to happen is, what I was, just to finish that last thought is I blame the Supreme Court for really slow rolling those cases. I mean, the reason they did not come to fruition is Judge Cannon and the Supreme Court. And our judicial system is not built for alacrity. And when I compare this to, because in Liar's Kingdom, I do a lot of comparing to what other countries do, we get an F. England gets an A. France gets an A. Brazil gets an A. These are all countries that have figured out how to have real trials with real due process of political leaders. And that is the sign of a healthy democracy, and we are not showing those signs. I think what is going to happen because of the pardon power is that Donald Trump, on the way out the door, is going to do what he has suggested, which is going to pardon everybody within a mile of the Oval Office. He is going
Right.
to issue the same kind of blanket pardons that he issued with respect to people who desecrated our democracy on January 6th. And unfortunately, except for the issue that I flagged with respect to the president, and whether he can pardon himself, he has that power under our Constitution. Obviously, that would be if I could wave a magic wand and change one thing in the Constitution, that would be it, because they did not imagine that that pardon power would be used in this way.
I could also, I don't want to say assume, we should also expect, Andrew, that it will also be a massive profit driver for him on the way out the door. Not just the people around him, but all those people who are like, I could probably, 25, 30 mil, I got that. I need this done. Why wouldn't he? Right? I mean, he's vacuuming up money everywhere else. Okay. Last question for me, and then Kitty, because I have to run in a second, if you wouldn't mind joining us again. My dear friend Evangeline asks, this is more in my wake, but your Democrats probably listen to you more than they listen to me, Andrew, is who is advising Democrats on these broader issues? Who are the thought leaders like yourself that Democratic leaders are seeking out?
Yeah, Reed, who are they?
It ain't me. So
and
you
where
have
the
to
hell
keep
are
looking.
they? And why isn't it you and Tim Miller and Sarah Longwell and the people who are sort of clear-eyed and no BS?
That's why I
You
call
know,
myself your friendly neighborhood Cassandra, to be right but never be believed.
wow, love it. So I do not know the answer to that question, but that's one of the reasons that what I try to do is put out into sort of the polity is
Mhm.
here as ideas, and I deliberately am trying to do it in a way that people can understand it and think about it and weigh in, and we can crowdsource it, because if it's going to happen, it is going to happen for the same reason that Minnesota was able to substantially stem what was going on there, for the reason that Congress finally did something with respect to the slush fund, because there's a public reaction and outcry.
And I would say this just as someone who spends a lot of time talking to voters. There is the appetite for that 100%, Andrew. Like people, enough is enough.
Yeah,
And we see that and to our Democratic friends, corruption is a good issue. It's always a good
yeah,
issue. It's a particularly good issue today, especially when, if you're a farmer and diesel is above $5 a gallon, or if you're just the average person in California trying to get to work and it's 7.50 a gallon, and you're trying to figure out how to get, on the 10 freeway to get to work. And these guys are back in DC doing everything they can to make sure their nests are as feathered as they can be. It's a good message and they should run on it more. All right, Kitty, I'm going to turn it over to you. Everybody in the chat, thank you so much. And Andrew, great to
yes.
catch up with you. I hope we can catch up again. And Kitty, as always, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, Reed and Andrew. We really appreciate it. What an
Thank you.
incredible hour of conversation. It went so fast. And I really like this idea of hardening the target. And that is what we're really trying to do at BigTent and across the country. So many Americans are working on hardening the target. So I hope everyone, we sent 50 copies out of the book to the first 50 registrants, but I hope everyone gets Andrew's book. It is a must read. And Andrew, I hope you'll come back before the midterms. We would love to have you. And I hope you get over to watch some tennis in England in a few weeks. I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm absolutely glad to come back anytime. And thanks everybody for staying engaged. It's so important right now.
It's what we got to do. Harden the target. All right, everyone. Have a good one. Thanks for coming to BigTent. Take care. Bye-bye.